So the fifth form of pawns in the center, according to Kotov and Keres, is the loaded center. They say it could also be called an unclear center, where you can't really see how the center will turn out to be. It could become any of the forms that we have discussed before. So this is perhaps the most difficult pawn form in the center. Nowadays you can see very often grandmasters play games where the pawns really don't take any contact with each other very early on. So it takes great calculation to know when to take contact with your opponent's pawns. This first game is between Smyslov and Kotov. The situation in the center is not completed. Black has two choices to exchange white's e-pawn, f5 or d5. White is afraid of f5, that's why he plays g4. Black plays rook to d8, immediately looking forward to playing d5, king h1, knight e6, bishop d2, and d5. White can't really take on d5 because then black would get the square d4 under control, and also he could control the central files, so black's position would be ideal. Knight f3, and here black plays d4, which is a mistake because this lessens the control that black has over the center. He should have taken on e4. So knight e2, knight c6. Now you can see how white's attack is quite effortless from here on. And here white plays a very nice move, knight f5, offering a knight for a pawn. For what? For opening up black's king position. Black takes that knight, and let's see where white's compensation is. Just in a few moves, white is able to seize the g-file. He plays a rook lift, and this is where black resigned. Look at the pressure on h6. There's triple pressure. It can't be met, and there's pressure on the g-file. That's enough for white to win. The next game I'd like to look at is between Geller and Smyslov. The fight for the center is in full effect. How are you going to build the pawn center, and when is it advantageous for white and when is it advantageous for black? Experience shows that if white is able to build a center with c3, c4, d4, e4, and f5, then he gets an advantage. As like in that case, black would have his pawns like this. Whereas if black can establish his pawns like this, as opposed to this, then black has a completely fine position. Look at this bathtub formation here. So both players are trying to get an advantageous pawn center here. E4 by white, knight E8, queen A4. Now this is not a very good move. White should have played F4 immediately. Queen to C8, an excellent move, putting pressure on C4. And also if white takes on C5, there's knight E5, just a really nice counter move. This queen is also protecting A6 and C6. Bishop E3, rook D1. And here white makes a mistake. He takes on C5. He should have played D5. Sure, it's an unclear position, but this just helps black. I should say white is playing too aggressively. Now white can't exchange queens because then he would lose the c4 pawn shortly afterwards. Let's say queen takes, knight takes, and then this knight comes back to a5. So queen to c2 here, f5, queen a4, and as you can see, white's pawn center is or the lack of pawns in the center is making it really difficult for white to kind of move his pieces. See how cramped these two are, just protecting c4, g5, h6. Black is taking his time. Putting pressure on e5. Just doubling on the d-file. Now black is going to seize the d-file, and white doesn't really have anything to do. He doesn't have a plan. He can't do anything about it. Black is just slowly improving his position. So rook d7, then we see knight c1, doubling, an exchange, and now the d-file is under black's control. Notice if something like rook d1, then c4 would fall because this bishop would be overloaded. Now Geller is trying to improve his game, but black easily thwarts it back. Knight to d5, bishop d2, and now black just takes on f4. Notice how black is now controlling f4, at least temporarily. It used to be white's knight outpost. So bishop takes, g takes, rook takes, excuse me, queen g5, king h7, doubling on the d-file, threatening rook d2. So now we have queen here. Now we have repetition because of time. Rook back, queen, queen, queen to g5, queen to e8, queen to e7, an exchange of queens, and this makes black's job easier because now he can just focus on the d-file, not having to worry about any counterattacks on the king side, because his king is a little bit exposed here. So king e2, No, sorry. Bishop a2, rook d7, and now Smyslov is making his advantage permanent with accurate play. Bishop b1, Black is willing to exchange rooks here. Rook h4, and knight e2 was probably not best. Active moves like rook f6 were needed. And e5, e4, and here white ran out of time, but his position is hopeless anyway. The next game is between Boleslavsky and Keres. Now this is obviously from Rui Lopez. Both sides are fighting for a better pawn structure in the center. You might have the idea of taking on e5 or pushing d4, d5. So let's see what Keres did here with black. Rook d8 and d5 here. Now as you can see, it's a very complex position. White could take here, which would be, I guess, winning a pawn, but then black could take here with tempo. So white could also take here, but then the same thing would happen, and this wouldn't be winning a pawn either. Also, white could take here, which would be another exchange. But I think this is pretty good for black, mainly because this rook is opposite this queen. So if this pawn takes, then the d file becomes more exposed, and if this pawn takes, then also the d file becomes semi-open. So I like the move d5. Here white took on d5, but that turned out to be a mistake. Now all the center pawns are gone. The center is open. Now in the piece game, black is gonna take the initiative soon. So it's not about the pawns anymore. Knight b3. And here white sacrifices quality. Because if he would have just played rook b1 or rook d1, he would have not been able to resist the pressure of the black pieces on the queen side. And just look at this game at this point. Black has a fairly healthy pawn structure. White's pawn structure is not bad either. He's down a pawn. But look at Black's pieces. This knight is excellent. This knight is also pretty good. This queen is quite good. Okay, this rook's not doing anything, but White's pieces, this knight is not really doing anything. This bishop is backwards. This rook's not doing anything. This bishop is not really that important, and this queen is just getting ready to get kicked on the e-file. White simply doesn't have any space here. So f4 by White, and now Black has another permanent outpost for his knight. White should just resign here. Boom. And here, a very nice finish. Sure, White's threatening mate, but Black plays knight d, or okay, knight f3 check. No, this other knight can't go to f3, so knight f3 check. And if king here, then this would be mate, so that's why White has to take. And now Black can play, for example, queen e2 check. Now if king goes here, we can have check, and if king goes here, we can have check followed by mate, and if king goes here, we can have check followed by mate, and if king goes here, we can have check followed by mate. So White resigned after knight f3. Now in the end it says that chess masters always take into consideration the terrain of the center pawns, and they force their opponents to the kind of play that it requires. Like, or maybe this is badly written, but I'd say that they play how they're supposed to play, like strategically, you know. So anyone who wants to learn to play chess, obviously this book is for beginners, has to examine thoroughly all these formations of the central pawns that come up, and arrange their games as correctly as possible. Now for me, this chapter was so useful because my middle game sucks. So now I won't be struggling as much with these problems. For example, this loaded center is maybe the most difficult, and now I can see that even in this position, you can see that Black kind of has better pawn structure. Black has these outposts, and well, his pieces are more active, so I guess here it's not about that much about pawns anymore. But even here, let's look at the end game. Let's take off the pieces. Okay, Black has one extra pawn, so it's winning. So that's one thing. But really, you can plan your game at any point of the game based on the pawns and play perfectly. And you know when to use your pieces or when to use your pawns. when to attack, when to defend, all that kind of stuff. So as a recap, the different pawn structures are closed center, open center, mobile center, solid center, and loaded center. Feel free to come back to these videos, and hopefully you got something out of it. Thanks very much.